Hello, I'm Kaiser and welcome to Moose Reads. Before I get started, I want to say that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I dislike a book, it is not a reflection on the author and it is not a reflection on people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Today, I will be reviewing Mossflower by Brian Jacques. This is the second book released and the third book chronologically in the Redwall series. It is an animal fantasy novel. The description says, "The clever and greedy wildcat Sarmina becomes ruler of all Mossflower Woods and is determined to govern the peaceful woodlanders with an iron paw. The brave mouse Martin and quick-talking mouse thief Gonf meet in the depths of Cotier Castle's dungeon. The two escape and resolve to end Sarmina's tyrannical rule. Joined by Dinny the Mole, Martin and Gonf set off on a dangerous quest for Salamandastron, where they are convinced that their only hope, Boar the Fighter, still lives." Once again, 3 stars. I did actually like this book better than the previous 2. I just still didn't like it enough. I'm pretty sure the main reason I liked it more was because of Gonf. I have a weakness for rogues. I did also feel like the plot was better in this one, although I can't quite put my finger on what differentiates it from the others. One thing that is becoming more grating the more of these I read is that all of the villains are stupid. I know they have to lose, but having them lose because they are incompetent doesn't make the heroes look especially brave or clever. I suspect I would enjoy these books a lot more if the villains came off as dangerous opponents making all the right moves, but the heroes were able to overcome them anyway. This book also had a couple things that sort of made me question the righteousness of the Woodlanders. Despite the fact that multiple people saw Martin get captured by Sarmina's soldiers in the very beginning of this book, they didn't even consider trying to rescue him because he wasn't someone they knew. Later, when they are discussing how to proceed with the fight against Cotier, Gonf suggests they get Chib the Robin to spy for them. One Woodlander says, "Chib's not one of us," another says, "I wouldn't trust a robin," and a third asks, "Why not one of our own?" Which all sounds a bit speciesist to me. Part of the problem, I think, is that Jacques is using a very black and white morality in these books, and he generally divides good guys and bad guys along species lines. But it still feels a bit uncomfortable having the good guys asserting that a robin is somehow less trustworthy by virtue of not being one of them. Also, later when they're negotiating with Chib to convince him to spy, he says that the presence of an eagle in the area will put him at greater risk, so he deserves more payment. Columbine, a young mousemaid, offers him double his pay if he runs into trouble with the eagle, but when questioned about it later by Gonf, she says she could have offered him 100 times the pay because there was no way he would survive such an encounter. Which means that she was fully aware he's putting himself at risk and doesn't care enough to deal honestly with him. That's all I have to say without spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, now is the time to pause or close the video. For everyone else, let's talk details. There's really not much to say with regards to spoilers either. Sarmina manages to be the worst leader even when her people are competent, which is rare enough. One of her captains notices Chib hanging around a lot, but when he tries to tell her about it, she cuts him off and tells him not to bother her. This really frustrated me. It was actually doubly frustrating because he had already tried to send someone ahead to tell her about the robin, but by sheer chance, that soldier got eaten by the eagle. So twice this guy tried to tell her something that would have drastically impeded the Woodlanders, but instead of having that be a complication, a combination of bad luck and stupidity works to throw away the tension. I really hated the Boar plotline. Martin, Gonf, and Dinny spend a significant chunk of the book trying to get to Salamandastron so that Boar can come back and help them, but we barely spend any time in Salamandastron or with Boar before he dies a heroic death at the hands of sea rats. I know the narrative purpose of going to Salamandastron was mainly to fix Martin's sword, but it still felt like a waste. It felt especially pointless because Jacques didn't even have time to properly establish the sea rats, so the big strong hero they've been questing to find so he can save everybody ends up dying to what amounts to a pile of nobodies. I appreciate that Gonf and Columbine made it very clear that they were into each other, but it was still a really shitty romance subplot. I think that's all I really have to say about Mossflower, but I want to take a moment to address a problem I've encountered with this series. So, the Redwall Problem. I've said more than once on this channel that I read Martin the Warrior in like 5th grade and loved it, and then proceeded to read about half the series before I got distracted. Given how much I used to love it, I kind of expected to still at least like it. But while it wasn't bad, I still wasn't especially enjoying it. Still, I had every intention of reading through this series, even if every one of them was likely to be 3 stars. In all honesty, I don't like quitting in the middle of a book or a series. I'm working on getting better about this because there are just too many books I want to read to waste time on ones I don't, but I still got a ways to go. Combine that with the nostalgia factor, and I've always been a little sad that I never finished this series. But one of the things that usually makes it really easy to quit a book or series is when they violate my one hard and fast rule. If the author can't be bothered to care about their own story, I don't need to either. That is to say, if the author of a book or a series forgets or contradicts too many or major details, then why should I waste my time reading them? I talked about this in my Mariner's Luck video. There, I called it the 10-year rule because so far, every time I've encountered this problem, it has been a book in a series published 10 or more years after the previous entry. Guess it's going to need a new name, though, because Jacques published these books with no more than a 2-year gap between one and the next. Even if I compare Mossflower against Martin the Warrior, it's only 6. But Jacques has broken my one rule. In Mossflower, when Martin and Gonf are imprisoned together, Martin tells Gonf a brief overview of his history, and almost none of the details match. Sure, he lived in some caves to the north with his father until his father left. Yes, his father gave him his sword and told him to protect their home, but the similarities end there. According to Martin, he spent his youth fighting sea rats to defend his home even before Luke left. He trained with his father's sword. He doesn't seem to have had a grandmother. When his father left, he didn't instruct him never to let anyone take his sword, a good thing, given that he keeps doing it. But he did tell him that if he hadn't returned by late autumn, Martin should do as he pleased. And when Luke didn't come back, Martin set off on his own. To be clear, I'm not complaining that Mossflower didn't properly recount Martin the Warrior. Mossflower was published 2nd, and Martin the Warrior 6th. Complaining that Mossflower doesn't know what happened in Martin the Warrior is nonsense. But I am complaining that Martin the Warrior didn't know what Martin said his story was in Mossflower. Fuck, Martin mentions Feldo the Wrestler when he's listing off friends that lived in the area. And then there's Salamandastron. Bor is Brocktree's son, so there's absolutely no question as to where this fits on the timeline. So the fact that Salamandastron seems to be completely different and generally more crudely formed makes 0 sense. It doesn't even seem to have a proper front gate in Mossflower. And again, Lord Brocktree was written later, but again, Jacques should have checked what he'd already said about the mountain. In Mossflower, the same room where Brocktree had his chambers apparently echoes terribly, so Bor's chambers are elsewhere. The layout of the secret prophecy room is entirely different, as well as the way in which the prophecy is received. For Bor, it's all written on the walls, but Brocktree had to breathe incense. Also, apparently, Brocktree not only knew how to get to Salamandastron, something he says flat out he doesn't in Lord Brocktree, he even wrote down secret instructions for his son to do the same once he'd grown. It's a mess, is what I'm saying. A mess I clearly didn't notice the first time around, but one I've noticed now. I know that it's difficult when you're writing a series and have already locked certain details in stone that don't work for the story you want to build later. That's the whole reason I'm not trying to get published myself until I've finished the whole thing. But the fact is, once you've published the first book, those words are written. You can't decide to change them later because they're inconvenient. And to some degree, I think that's what happened here. Jacques wrote Mossflower, and the things he wrote in Mossflower didn't work for the story he wanted to write in Martin the Warrior or Lord Brocktree. So he wrote what he wanted, and either hoped no one noticed or thought no one would care. But I also think it's the age-old problem of authors refusing to reread their work once it's published. He didn't know what he had written because it had been 6 years when he wrote Martin the Warrior and 12 when he wrote Lord Brocktree, but he didn't go back and check either. Either way, if he didn't care or hoped I wouldn't, then I won't. I'm done with Redwall. Nostalgia be damned, I'm not going to read a series I'm not really enjoying when it violates my most important rule of writing. I don't encourage anyone else to read it either. Anyway, that's all I have to say. If you liked this video, I hope you'll watch more in the future. Thanks for watching this one. Bye.